So in this video, I'll be covering some observations Bertrand Russell makes in the last chapter. Chapter 17, he entitles The Happy Man, the Happy Person. A quote to begin: "Happiness, as is evident, depends partly upon external circumstances and partly upon oneself." Though he doesn't have the kind of clinical language as we do today, what Bertrand Russell is basically suggesting is to relate to ourselves in a manner that promotes a deeper self-acceptance, such that we decrease the urge that when we don't have that self-acceptance, that wants us to be preoccupied with ourselves, in particular with how good or bad we are or are doing, how successful or unsuccessful, or even, he points out, how happy or unhappy we are, which can be a useful inquiry. Why am I unhappy? Yet he thinks it fosters the kind of neurotic self-preoccupation that, with so many suggestions, he advises us to get out and to experience the world and invest ourselves in the things of this world, and to forget about ourselves, really. Okay. One key principle we have learned over this series is to also fully accept reality, to fully accept life in all of its presentations, in the good, bad, and ugly, and not to attempt, the ego attempts this quite a bit, to interfere or manipulate life such that we get more of the good and avoid the bad. So living fully in reality and taking up a curious stance in the face of what we find and what we encounter. Having a realistic appraisal, also living in reality, of yourself, such that you can appoint yourself with your talents, skills, and abilities to pursuing meaningful activities in life, and that you have reasonable chances at success if you have a realistic appraisal. He says, relatedly, no satisfaction based upon self-deception is solid, and however unpleasant the truth may be, it's best to face it once and for all, to get used to it, and to proceed to build your life in accordance with it. Alan Watts says it such: to see life whole is to understand opposing qualities like joy and sorrow, or limitation and opportunity, are essential to its existence without trying to interfere, without dissecting the body of the universe so that its pleasant portions may be preserved and its unpleasant cast away. Another key takeaway that we've seen over and over again is to take an enlarged perspective, taking up wide and varied interest beyond narrow personal concern or practical importance. He says, those who fail to be interested in the spectacle of the world are foregoing one of the privileges that life has to offer. Not taking yourself too seriously, or casting yourself into some self-appointed role, to let life live you and carry you where you need to go. That is, getting over yourself sooner rather than later frees up immense energy for constructive use and protects you against what he labels as routine disappointments and disillusionment that someone more concerned with personal success, or even personal protection for that matter, is liable to. Alan Watts, again, says it's an easy sell to the head that, derived from careful philosophy, we understand how we suffer, but difficult to convince the heart to base one's attitude of life on a universal as distinct from a personal point of view. Another key takeaway, I particularly like this one, is the diversification strategy, which ensures a certain kind of resilience in the face of inevitable and often unforeseen challenges, loss, defeat, blocks, etc. So if you've diversified your investments across different domains of life, different kinds of practices and activities, and for that matter, diversifying your network, relying on different kinds of people, having a lot of different relationships, acquaintances, can really help, because inevitably some of those branches will fail, and rather than be defeated by a single blow, a diversification strategy lets us keep living, more or less. It's an insurance policy. It's a way of not putting all your eggs in one basket. Also, Jonathan Haidt says that when we do experience something joyful, or something goes our way, or we're excited about something, we should both savor that and have a variety of things that allow us those positive emotions. Another thing that comes up again and again is Bertrand Russell's warning about escapism. He finds that escapism is one easy trap to fall into, but really gets in the way of cultivating a happy life. He says it this way, that forms of escapism negate unhappiness rather than produce genuine happiness. They take the edge off, they numb, they obliterate the self. The easiest example, and most commonly used, we might say, is using psychoactive substances to escape one's pain or frustration, which is just forestalling efforts that may be taken to cultivate a happy life. Not to mention, escapism has drastic effects to our health, longevity, quality of life, damages relationships and reputation, undermines responsible living and the reciprocity of our commitments. Escapism is a sort of symptom. We may see it as a symptom because an unhappy person seeks relief from him or herself. And so going on this journey and trying to be a person with whom you like to spend time, that you like your company, and are enjoying what you are engaged in, you won't need to seek such relief from yourself. Of course, living in moderation or balance is threaded throughout this work, that involving ourselves in excess or deficiency can get us into trouble. So a life of moderation is recommended. Aristotle, back in the day, in the Nicomachean Ethics, right, in ancient Greece, saw happiness indeed as a golden mean, or an intermediate between deficiency and excess. For example, he examined courage as a virtue and a halfway point between recklessness and cowardice. Happiness, he named as, is not about simply satisfying appetites, which is more base, just like in one of those core positive psychology models, the Martin Seligman model. I never can say that guy's name right. That we need both pleasure, hedonism, and meaning, those higher order causes of happiness. One thing he covers more at length in chapter 17 specifically, which has applicability to those who are drawn to dialectical behavioral therapy, is that he warns against what he calls excessive emotional reactions. Why I referenced DBT is that a lot of people seeking the program live in what's called emotion mind in the program. This is discovered in the skill Wise Mind, which advocates for an integration between logic and reason, and a kind of practical way of thinking about things, and emotion mind, which is processing experiences, decisions, situations emotionally. Excessive emotional reactions can get us into trouble because they expend energy. They exhaust our energy reserves on what Bertrand Russell might find quite petty. He says, many people get into a fret or a fury over every little thing that goes wrong, and in this way waste a great deal of energy that might be more usefully employed. The energy people waste on trivial troubles, he says a little bit later, would be sufficient, if more wisely directed, to make and unmake empires. Basically, he's recommending that we decrease reactivity and that we take life as it is and we take things in stride and we spend our energy on constructive efforts rather than emotional reactions. There's something about what he calls greatness of soul, which doesn't permit us to be petty, self-seeking, troubled by trivial misfortunes, or dreading what fate may have in store for us. I love this anecdote that he relays. So he says, basically when your shoelace breaks when you're running to catch a bus, right? Instead of wasting your energy getting into a bad mood the rest of the day, he suggests that you reflect on the event in the context of the entire history of the cosmos, and until the event in question that you're worked up about loses its great importance. Love that context. Always great to remember that, to be humbled in the face of the greatness of the universe and of history, for that matter, and everything else going on in the world. It's really good to keep ourselves in check in that way. For me, I really have this practice of whenever I'm in like a developing cluster, I pretend like I'm on SNL and that like I'm developing a skit, and that kind of comedic relief helps in the moment. And then it also is just a great way to conjure stories. I mean, it's a great way to repurpose these, what Bertrand Russell's calling trivial misfortunes, into high art. Another key takeaway that we may have forgotten about, it hasn't come up in quite some time, is kind of a peculiar recommendation, but it makes sense once we examine it. Bertrand Russell's really in favor of living close to our biological rhythms and the natural rhythms of the earth, the context in which we evolved. And it might be said that we should secure happiness from the ground up through living a life that really satisfies basic needs and instincts. And I absolutely adore his concluding thesis, which appears in the last 2 pages of this chapter, the last 2 pages of the book. I've quoted from it quite a bit and simply want to relay these last ideas to you in their intact form. He says, all unhappiness might be understood in the framework of a lack of integration, through lack of coordination between the conscious and unconscious mind, or between self and society, a lack of harmony between the parts of life, where these two parts are not knit together by the force of objective interests and affections. The happy person is the person who doesn't suffer from these kinds of failures of unity, whose personality is neither divided against itself nor pitted against the world. Such a person feels him or herself a citizen of the universe, enjoying freely the spectacle that it offers and the joys that it affords, untroubled by the thought of death, because this kind of person feels not really separate from those who will come after him or her. It is in such profound instinctive union with the stream of life that the greatest joy can be found. On a personal note, I first discovered and read The Conquest of Happiness in 2016. And when I did, it functioned like corrective medicine. It felt to me to be distilled, clear wisdom, gentle, useful, simple, yet powerful reminders from what we might call this body of work, a wisdom tradition. The Conquest of Happiness is a wisdom tradition. Bertrand Russell's desire to spend some of his life energy, in using his brilliant faculties in a sort of public service efforts to tackle problems from a humanitarian basis, to figure out why people are unhappy and what helps people become happy, forging rational suggestions and solutions to cure common human predicaments in the spirit of humanism. It continues to function as a wisdom tradition on a personal level as I continue to slide into the very traps, mindsets, propaganda, dispositional trends, and default patterns of conditioning he warns about that promote unhappiness. So on a personal level, I'm still conquesting happiness. And when I read it, it reminds me again and again and again of where I am derailed and where I should put my energy and effort. So I hope that you, like I have, continue to engage and return to this material to keep up your own conquest of happiness. It has been my pleasure to be your guide over this last year in that conquest. Said with certain emphasis, per our common endeavor, in a common loving kindness meditation or metta prayer, may all living beings everywhere on all planes of existence, known and unknown, be peaceful, be free from suffering, and be happy.